Hey there, Mentionables fans. I'm Joel Furchess, and I'm here to introduce our new video series, answering another atheist video titled 7 Signs You'll Be an Atheist Soon. Let's take a look.
Today I have 7 signs you'll be an atheist one day. But first, roll that intro.
Okay, we are live.
Without further ado, let's get started. 7 signs you'll be an atheist one day. Number 1. You avoid those God questions that bother you.
If you find that you avoid questions about God because they make you feel uncomfortable, questions like, how can a God exist who's loving while at the same time there's so many terrible things happening in the world? Or how come it feels like nobody's listening to me when I pray? Or so many other things that butt up against your own notion of God that you'd rather just not hear it or stay away from it altogether because it just doesn't feel good. Well, you may become an atheist soon.
Okay, first things, you'll notice the heavily evangelistic tone of this video. It's very ironic how often so much of these are not actually signs that one will be an atheist. What they are is a kind of self-aggrandizing platform for them to make some of the most bald assertions, ironically sometimes directly undermining what they themselves are trying to say or what another one of their atheists say in the same video, just in a different segment. Okay, so how about this first one, that you avoid those God questions that bother you? This question is somewhat humorous to me. I'll respond to some of his specific sub-questions, but think about what this question assumes. If you avoid asking hard questions because they don't make you feel good, then you might become an atheist. So the ones who don't ask questions, who don't seek out the best sources, who don't seek out the evidence to answer the tensions, who think of their faith as just something to make them emotionally feel good, and who leave when they just don't feel good anymore, those are the ones who are going to become atheists. I mean, maybe. It's an implicit admission that those who leave for non-intellectual, non-rational, non-evidentiary positions, who desire to just feel good, they're the ones who will be atheists. And I might agree with that. I found that many of those who leave the church and become hardcore atheists often do it for very irrational reasons and kind of hedonistic desire to feel good or live a life of autonomy where they don't need to submit to God. So, yeah, that's not really surprising. So that's just an ironic part of this sign that he gives. But also notice what he lists, the problem of suffering. Now, I understand that for many this is a big challenge to their faith, but it's not a sign that one will become an atheist. In fact, often what brings people out of atheism and into faith in God is precisely that they go through a time of suffering or tragedy and they turn back to their Creator for meaning and purpose through it all. Others will look through the Bible and find that suffering is just ubiquitous throughout the Bible. One thing is promised in scriptures: sin. We know that we are sinners living in a fallen world full of sin and evil and pain and suffering and death. The Bible nowhere promises that the believer will be suffering free or that the world will be without pain. In fact, by the time we get to the New Testament, it's almost a certainty that believers will suffer. I would argue that the believer who struggles with the problem of suffering is the one who simply is not grounded in the scriptures. Does that mean that suffering and the objections to God's existence based on suffering will be existentially easy for the believer? Of course not. But it's not some surprising question that all of us just avoid. The same for feeling like God isn't listening to your prayers. This betrays a very shallow notion of the relationship between God and man, so that we will or even should, quote unquote, feel God. And that's just not a biblical concept. Nowhere are we told that we're to have such feelings. This is like those who think that Sunday morning worship needs to be an emotionally moving experience full of stage performance quality music from a band and sermons that will have you crying in your seat. I'm sorry. That's 20th century Finneyism. That's not Scripture. So what this sign shows us is that these Christians, rather than leaving the faith, need to mature in their understanding of their faith, not abandon it.
So as fortune would have it, I'm currently doing an extensive case study on exactly this: Christians who become atheists. So in broad response to this claim in general, I haven't seen an avoidance of God questions in these cases. I've actually seen an obsession with God questions in these cases. Typically there's one trigger question that the person uses, becomes a little obsessed with, and that's part of this deconversion process in most cases that I've studied. Having said that, let's take a look at this premise. The premise seems to be that you avoid the uncomfortable questions about God if you're starting the process of becoming an atheist. So everybody else in the Christian church is not uncomfortable with these hard questions about God, right? You ask your average Christian about why is there suffering if God is loving, and they're really eager to engage in that question, right? Well, that actually isn't the case. For the most part, everyone is uncomfortable with these difficult questions about God. And so this premise just doesn't hold. It's almost as if they're trying to convince people that since they're uncomfortable with the questions about God, they might be slipping towards atheism. The fact of the matter is that people generally are uncomfortable with difficult questions about things that they value. So if you ask somebody a difficult question about the politics they hold, that makes them uncomfortable. If you ask a person a difficult question about the type of parenting that they do, that's going to make them uncomfortable. It's a psychologist condition that we call cognitive dissonance, which describes the uncomfortable feelings that you get when you're confronted with a difficult question about something that you value. And everybody has it. So no, this isn't going to be a sign that you're becoming an atheist soon. It's just a sign that you have the same human condition, that you don't like to think about things that challenge things that you hold dear to yourself.
This was a peculiar video to watch and see the things that they think means you're going to become or probably will become an atheist in the future. Interesting thing is, most of them apply across the board. They're not unique to the religious atheist kind of dynamic. They apply to anyone. I mean, they apply to atheists. Hey, atheists, if these are you, you're probably going to become a believer soon. Well, it doesn't really mean anything. A lot of these just apply to anyone in any belief or any position at all. The first one, for instance, right? He says that if you're not willing to face up to the hard things in your belief, then you're probably on your way to being an atheist. Well, okay, anyone who has a shallow understanding of their position or their belief and who isn't willing to really dig in and look at parts of their belief that might make them uncomfortable, well, yeah, that person might be likely to abandon that belief for something else that makes them more comfortable. But that works in whether you're religious, whether you're atheist, whether we're talking politics, your sports team preferences. Right? These are things that don't actually have much to do with religion. It's just the way people think. If you're shallow and focused on comfort, if you look at the two things that he says are kind of the reasons people don't look at the tough issues. One, because it doesn't feel good. Well, newsflash, feelings do not define reality. Right? You don't base rational choices on how you feel about something. And so basically what he is saying is that people who are emotionally driven and are irrational because they're just seeking what feels good, they're more likely to be an atheist. Now, the second thing that he points out is that people will probably leave because their notion of God kind of bumps up against reality, and they don't like that, so they end up stop believing. Well, okay, fine. Their own notion of God kind of rubs up against reality in an unpleasant way. Well, you got two choices there. Maybe it's that God doesn't exist and you just need to give up this whole thing anyway. Or could it possibly be that your own notion of God isn't really God? Maybe you're misunderstanding what God is, and the God that you've created in your own mind is what is bumping up against reality and causing discomfort. So how about we determine truth based on what's an accurate representation of something, not our own made-up subjective experience. Maybe the point is that not that you need to give up God, but that you don't know him as well as you thought you did. See, our discomfort, the angst, the feelings, the questions we have, they don't need to be an excuse for us to push away from God. Rather, we go, I don't understand, but I want to, and we press into God, pursuing that relationship, seeking answers in him. There is no reason why uncomfortable questions should lead a Christian to abandon their faith.
Here we go. Brand new video series. I'm afraid we're off to a bad start. Let's think about this for a minute. You might become an atheist if you avoid hard questions about God. This actually makes sense. It also explains why many atheists resort to jokes and straw men rather than reasoning. You see, if you're avoiding finding answers to your hardest questions in any worldview, then you're not trying that hard. So if this first sign is accurate, it really doesn't bode well for whatever worldview this unlucky soul moves to either.